Welcome back to Unbreakable Truth in Education with Natalie and Monica on the We Are the People Network. We are going to do part 2 of Just Say No to Smut in Schools. And we'll give you a little recap of what we talked about last time. Last time we talked about who is pushing this agenda to have objectionable books and materials in our schools. And when we say objectionable, it usually covers the sexual materials, but also the highly violent and the graphic and the morbid, all sorts of materials that are maybe not pornographic, but porn adjacent.
Right, including the LGBTQ books.
Yes, yes. And we talked a little bit about the laws, which these movements, these activist movements to push these books into our schools are fighting against, and how the laws have played into the opposition, and whether they're actually helping protect kids from pornographic materials in schools.
So today, we're going to move on with the discussion. We encourage you to go back and watch the first one, but there is, in all of our efforts to get the smut out of the schools, there are other ways that the activists and extremists are finding to get kids the porn and the sexually explicit content anyway.
Yes, absolutely. And we talked about last time how teachers have personal libraries, and how parents don't necessarily know what books are in that personal library. They're not entitled to that information, and how kids can access those books in a teacher's personal library. What's very interesting is that libraries are playing a very important part in getting these types of objectionable books into kids' hands, and not just the school libraries and not just the teachers' personal libraries, but your city libraries as well.
The public libraries,
yes.
All of which are funded by taxpayer dollars.
Yes.
Which, whether the objectively sensitive material is in a school or whether it's in a public library, it still violates the criminal code. So why do we allow that? And why are we funding it with taxpayer dollars? In states across the nation, there's been an effort to pass laws to get the porn and the sexually explicit content out of schools. But other states across the nation have also realized that it's a problem in the public libraries as well, and they are running bills on that. But here in Utah, it's crickets when it comes to dealing with a problem in our public libraries where children have access to sexually explicit, sensitive material. So when the efforts to write legislation to get the smut out of the schools began, and the claims from the activist groups came that we are trying to ban books, the people wanting the smut out of the schools assured the activists that no, we're not banning books, because if we were truly trying to ban books, you wouldn't be able to have access to those books anywhere else either. Right now, we're just trying to take it out of the schools. So, if a family wants their kid to read the smut, they can just go to the public library and get it there instead, or go to Amazon and get it there instead. Those of us, or the people that want to get rid of the smut in the schools, just shot themselves in the foot, because now it's much harder for us to go after the books in the public library, or in the public libraries that shouldn't be there, that are also criminal when it comes to giving children or minors access to it. So when, states across the nation are now saying, the smut is not okay in the public schools or in the public libraries, the public shouldn't be providing, meaning taxpayer-funded public services should not be providing smut for kids, or porn, sexually explicit content for kids, whether it's in the school library or in the public library. It's not okay either way. So we've kind of lost the argument before we've even started as far as trying to get it out of the public libraries, unless we admit that, no, we're not banning books. Like, you will always be able to find these smut if you want it. It just is, you're never going to be able to completely get rid of it. But we, as a civil society, have an obligation to protect children, period. And if we can't protect children from this kind of corrosive content that sets them up for failure in their lives and makes it so they will never be able to have a healthy, functional marriage or family down the road, because they have all of these issues and behavioral addictions and trauma that keep them from being able to create those lasting relationships. We will not have a civil society. We will not have a society that can last.
Oh, absolutely. We won't. There's something I want to go back to. You talked about the public libraries now having all this content freely available to children still, and how we're just trying to keep it out of the hands of school children in school. Well, that's not necessarily so, because as long as this material is accessible in the public libraries are now serving as a pipeline to get this material into kids' hands, regardless of whatever laws apply to them in the schools.
Right, and the tech is what makes that possible.
Absolutely. So here we have the instance of Park City School District. Park City School District has remodeled, I believe, one of their schools. And what they've decided is that in remodeling this school, what we're going to do is kind of eliminate their physical library. And so they released this kind of clarification on the library resources for Park City School District memo. And they said, we would like to address recent headlines suggesting that Park City High School will not have library resources available to students. This is a misunderstanding that we need to clarify. Yes, we are transitioning away from a traditional library model, but we have a commitment to providing students with comprehensive access to library resources, and that remains steadfast. So how are they going to do this? How are they going to commit to maintaining kids' access to library resources without a physical library necessarily?
So how are they doing this? They give library cards, public city library cards, to the kids at school.
Yes, it says in the memo that to make library resources more accessible, we have integrated the library card application process into our student registration system. So they've combined the two systems. Students can easily apply for a Park City library card online, and the library staff will process these applications efficiently. Students will pick up their library cards over the summer or receive them at the start of the fall semester. So now they're just creating this pipeline straight from the city library. They're bypassing the necessity of a school library, and the kids have access to all the books because nothing has been, quote unquote, banned in the public library.
Right. Well, this is part of the community engagement that is becoming a huge focus. Community and family engagement is a big push in the school system right now, to expand the walls of the school to incorporate the entire community. So you're gonna see these kind of partnerships, public and private partnerships, working with the schools for supports and services, so that the kids have access to all of these services and content that they never had before in a closed school system. And the technology is a huge assistance in that. Right here in the document, it says community support and new spaces. The new spaces and resources provided by the Park City School District were made possible by the community support during the 2021 school bond campaign. These new facilities will include advanced learning environments that support various educational programs. So the entire educational environment is changing right before our eyes.
Isn't that interesting how fluid and how really dynamic it has become with these online resources and with the integration of communities, partners stepping in to fill the gaps, right?
Yes, fill the gaps and do what the school itself is not allowed to. So bills are being passed to limit what a school can do, but then they're bringing in their partners. And the legislature is not regulating public and private partnerships that interact with the school and provide services that the school is not able to. So I said in one of our last shows that it's these social justice agendas are like the force of a tsunami. They push their way into every crack and crevice. They break down every boundary, every barrier that was there to protect, so that, you've got adults and organizations and entities coming at your child from every direction imaginable. How do you even begin to protect your child in an environment like that? So when they talk about climate change or the environment, they're not talking about, the temperature changing and the weather. They're talking about climate change, the environment, the learning environment, so that school can be everywhere all the time and children have access to all of these things that they typically needed or traditionally have needed a parent to be able to be an intermediary or a protection for them in receiving those services.
Oh, yeah. And everybody now in the community is a potential teacher of your child.
Yes.
And yet they're not accountable to the same standards as teachers.
Right. They can't be fired.
No, they can't. It's really amazing because when you think of it, and here we are, we're celebrating, yay, we banned 13 books from the schools, and yet those 13 books plus myriad others are still available in the public libraries. And so we had a mom who went to her local public library recently, and there, in honor of Banned Books Week, they had a big display, a huge display of a whole bunch of books that were banned for sexual content, for graphic violence, etc. But what's interesting is they kind of juxtapose the books next to other books that aren't bad books, but for whatever reason aren't in certain school libraries. And so this is what she said. She said, I'm at my local public library right now. Take a close look at this display and the book titles on it. They have the Old Testament next to Flamer and Song of Solomon, and beneath Melissa, which, the first one is a book about a boy's homosexual experience at a scout camp. And then the second one has some really, sexually explicit information and material in it. And then you have Melissa, which is a book about, I believe, a transgender kid or a non-binary kid. And then this mother goes on and says, we have the Book of Mormon audio next to the book Tricks. And we have the New Testament next to Stamped and All Boys Aren't Blue.
Okay. This is intentional mixing of good and evil so that they can't find the one without finding the other.
Right.
It's like black and white, in your face, almost like it's targeting Christian children.
So we have the whole pantheon of smutty books available at your local library, and kids are being issued local library cards as a workaround. But there's also another way they can access these books online and without any sort of library card needing to be issued, and that is through the Sora library app that is given to all the students. They're all asked to download it onto their Chromebooks or onto their phones, and that's the library app the schools use for the school's electronic content. But what was noticed with the Sora library app is that a student can not only select their school library to check books out of, and when we looked at the Sora library app, I believe all those 13 banned books were not available through the local school library, online library.
Which again doesn't mean that lots of other inappropriate content isn't
right,
available.
and there still is, right? But the app gives the student the opportunity to select their local library's selection of content by just typing in their zip code.
The city library.
Yeah, their local library, whether it's the county or city library. And so, it was noticed that 9 of the 13 so-called banned books were available through the Sora app from one child's local library.
Right. Everything links to everything. So, there's a way around all of the, anything that the legislature might put into place, they'll find a way around it. It seems they are intent to do that. New York's Brooklyn library system has a program called Books Unbanned, and it's their goal to ensure that children nationwide have unprecedented access to their all-inclusive online library collection in order to overcome the supposed censorship by schools and religious groups and parents. And they say that they want kids to have access to these because kids are afraid that their parents won't let them read certain things, or that if they're at home, their parents might be surveilling them. So for their book choices. So they want to make it as accessible and anonymous as possible for these kids to read what they want. It sounds like the old porn stores, right, in the seedy part of town, where people went in and they just put a disguise on or something. So if you look at this article, it talks about this is about their program. It says they've seen nearly 9,300 e-card applications as part of the Books Unbanned program. Over 7,500 applications were completed, including more than 3,300 card renewals. And close to 4,700 of those cards, they say, are now active, meaning they've been used to borrow materials as of April 2024, 271,000 items have been accessed. And Utah gets highlighted here in their article. It says per capita, Oregon, Vermont, Utah, Nebraska, and Maine topped the list for most number of card applications per 100,000 in population. Then it talks about the top 5 themes of banned books that, as reported by teens, so they're taking their information from teens who are complaining supposedly about not being able to get the books they want. And they want to provide them a more diverse set of books to choose from that some would consider inappropriate. So just glancing through this, if we skip down, it says, the privacy young people have to peruse and borrow digital material from the BPL collection is crucial, despite the knee-jerk reaction by some parental rights activists that they might have. And then they claim that none of their materials available in the public libraries or school libraries are pornographic or obscene.
Well, that's quite a claim. I'm guessing if you were to ask the average parent, they would disagree very strongly.
But we've seen the content ourselves.
Yes.
Anybody that's seen those books and looked at it, they can't even show it on the news. The legislature can't show it in their meetings to discuss these issues.
No.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
So the library cards that are being given out by the Brooklyn Public Library, they say are a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. But it's a Band-Aid offering the kind of support and broad reach that so many others cannot or are not giving. So they feel it's their moral obligation to make sure kids can get this material. They say that the data shows a broad range of barriers that young people have when it comes to borrowing and reading books that they are interested in. And it's interesting because then they have solicited thousands of letters from teenagers to share, kind of become activists for the cause and say, I'm being denied these books every which way. And we saw this up at the legislature when HB 29 was being debated in a committee at the Park City School District. The administration there actually brought a student to come and testify to the committee about why he should be given the freedom to read. He should be free to read and access all content and not be denied any content. And so there's an example of administrators turning kids into activists for the cause and using activists or using students as kind of a human shield for their own activism. So the first letter or from a student that the Brooklyn Library article shares out of many is one from Utah. And so I think this is relevant to our audience. Listen how this is what they highlighted. It says, the student says, I grew up in a religious and conservative family. A lot of things I was taught and then never allowed to question. Of course, as I got older, I began to question things I once believed, and over time began to read about the questions adults wouldn't answer for me. And as I've grown older, it's gotten simultaneously easier and harder. People are aware of the pushback against books that speak plainly about issues or overt allegories, but that doesn't mean that they've gotten easier to access. Of course, pirating exists, and I cannot say I've never pirated anything, but I try to support authors and libraries where I can, and that has grown difficult in the years passing. It is so much easier to accidentally stumble across something that leads more into propaganda for capitalism and our current way of life than it is to deliberately find something of actual meaning that speaks against it.
Wow.
That was from a 19-year-old in Utah.
Well, we know that there are books that are not the best for kids. We know that there are books that are just in terms of objective content, very objectionable. So what are the best books? And parents play a crucial role in leading their kids to the best books possible. That's our job. And we strongly believe that classical literature has always been one of the best sources of good knowledge for kids that can apply to them no matter their social situation, no matter their socioeconomic status, no matter their gender, no matter their race. It transcends all those factors because it speaks to the crucial aspects of what it means to be human. And so it's very sad to me as a former English teacher that classical literature has been pushed aside in many of the schools in favor of this smut, in favor of this so-called inclusive literature.
Well, or it's being taught, the classic literature is being taught, but through these woke lenses.
Sure.
So
right.
They're subverting them, which is a problem too.
Yeah, and so we need to reverse this trend of junk food for the mind being okay, of classics being the null curriculum, meaning curriculum that isn't taught in the schools. And that's how teachers control, if you're not teaching something, you're teaching something else in its place. And so that's how they control the narrative. And then, of course, we have to get away from social justice handbooks that masquerade as literature. My kids saw plenty of that when they were in the system. So what is true literacy? True literacy is making meaning from print and using print to create meaning. And meaning is where the best literature truly shines. It's the biggest hallmark of classical literature is that it has, again, transcendent meaning. One of the best things about classical literature that we mentioned before is its timelessness. The best prose and poetry really has a way of transcending its era or its origin. The Bible, you have Shakespeare's works, you have Beowulf, you have the Iliad, you have the Odyssey.
The whole Western canon.
The whole Western canon. All of these have withstood the test of time. And they really retain their relevance to current generations. It doesn't matter, again, from what corner of the globe you come from. I think Shakespeare is printed in every language on the planet, and so is the Bible, for that matter. And so you can get good books wherever you are.
Well, and I would say, the activists would say that a lot of those books, according to our standards, should also be banned. The difference is that these books are building. They're not tearing down. They're putting things in their proper context. They're not distorting.
Yes.
And I think that that's a huge thing to take into consideration when you get these false arguments back.
Right, and we've seen the activists say, well, if a book even mentions sex, it gets banned. Well, that's not true. It's when it gets explicit about sex, because there are sex acts that are mentioned in the Bible, so to speak. But that doesn't make the Bible sexually explicit.
Right.
Yes. And so the next thing that really hallmarks good literature is universality. The best prose and poetry speak to the aspects of human nature that we all hold in common and yet still give unique expression to. Again, the Bible and Shakespeare's plays kind of epitomize this quality in the Western canon. And so, we can see that from the number of languages they're translated into. We see richness of expression. That's really important when you look at what the kids are being given to read nowadays. A lot of these books, they read like a bad text message chain.
Right, or like AI wrote it. See you later, and it's all this really nasty shorthand, right, that kids use to chat with on social media. Well, that speaks to the graphic novels. Kids are reading less and less, and so they're giving them more and more pictures.
Yes.
Because a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? They can still teach a lot with pictures, but they know that the kids are becoming more and more dependent on pictures because their reading levels have gone way down because we're not focusing on language acquisition. We're not focused on vocabulary or expanding vocabulary. It's shrinking vocabulary. There are very few people I've talked to that say that their kids still have vocab tests or spelling tests because that can all be done for them by AI and the computer generated programs that they're using now that don't require them to think. And so if only to preserve our language, because if we lose our language, what will we have left? We won't be able to understand our founding documents. We won't be able to understand scripture. And say what you may, scripture is a wonderful source for rich vocabulary.
Oh, absolutely.
To expand their vocabulary and help them understand what words have meant historically, because the language is, the words that they do know have all been redefined as well. So we have this kind of Tower of Babel scenario kind of happening where our language and our understanding, everything's being confounded.
Oh, absolutely. It totally is. And then if you move on to the next area, which is a concern with the truth, like revealing or discerning the truth is the apex, I think, of what literature should be achieving. And we're not talking nebulous concepts of your truth versus my truth, but truth with a capital T, objective, empirical truth.
It's unchangeable.
Unchangeable.
Right?
It's simple and it's essential. And if you are homeschooling, you might be familiar with the Thomas Jefferson Education, where it's kind of a guide, a handbook for parents who are homeschooling their kids, and to do it in a classical way. There are different categories of stories in the Thomas Jefferson Education, and the first category is bent stories. So bent stories portray evil as good and good as evil. That's a lot of these anti-hero narratives and stories. And bent stories are not good for kids. They kind of create this like cognitive dissonance in kids, so you try to avoid them like the plague. And then it talks about broken stories. And in broken stories, the books accurately portray evil as evil and good as good, but evil wins. And in broken stories, it means, well, something was right, but now it's broken. And they're not necessarily uplifting stories, right?
And they kind of leave you hanging and just,
feeling a little like anxious, maybe a little bit trepidatious. You have books like Animal Farm, which could be a broken story, 1984, Lord of the Flies. And evil wins in these books. But, kids, depending on the book, can be exposed to those concepts at certain stages. But you have to, again, be careful because some of these books can be too heavy for kids. When I was a senior, I think we read one broken story after another. I think it was like 5 or 6 in a row.
Until you felt broken.
It was way too much, and it was a lot. And then you have whole stories, and whole stories are where good is just good, and good wins. And a lot of the classics fall into this category. And then you have healing stories, and that could be either whole or broken stories, where the reader is really profoundly moved or changed or significantly improved by the reading experience. And so the recommendation, of course, is to avoid the bent stories. And it's, your home is always the most important place for your kids to give you the opportunity to sit side by side with your children, to create this culture of reading and of classical literature. This is something I've done with my kids. I loved it. I loved being able to sit down with my kids, and this is how we bonded. We'd read stories together.
You read it and talk about it, and so many great conversations come from reading with your child.
Yes.
And the school wants to take that place. They want the child going through these things with them, and so that they can influence your child with their worldview and deprive you of that opportunity.
So here are some steps you can take with your children. You can read out loud to your children every day. You can read out loud, and you should read out loud even if they look like they're not paying attention. They're absorbing the language. They're hearing the syntax. It's good for them. It's good for their minds.
And it's good for us as parents, because a lot of us, we're not as literate as we would like to be.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's good for all of us. One of the biggest things we can do is read those classics and stories that will spark their imaginations, that'll sustain their spirits and fill their vocabularies. And, start with these challenging stories when they're young. We would read The Hobbit to our children. As soon as the oldest one hit 3, we began. And it was a great experience for us. Your children are never too old to be read to or to read with. It's a wonderful way to connect.
Right. Well, and if the schools want us to wait until our kids are older or in school to start reading to them, we've kind of missed the boat in a lot of ways. It's never too late.
Yes.
But children are in that language acquisition phase of their learning when they're little.
Yes.
Like they pick it up like sponges. And so the more you can give to them when they're little of good, rich language and vocabulary, they're going to be so much the better for it.
Oh, so much the better for it. So great books make for great conversations. Center your conversations around these books. You can be your child's first book club, and you can read these good books. Use different voices to make the books come to life. And whatever you do not time your child's reading. They always tell you at the school, you need to read, your kid needs to read 20 minutes a day. That's like the worst advice ever.
Right? You just want them to get lost in the book.
Yes.
And keep reading and not be thinking about the clock and how much longer do I have to go.
Yeah, because then you're just teaching your kid to watch the clock instead of to read the book. Look up the words with your children in a dictionary. Grow your home library. Fill it with the best books. Read in the car together whenever possible, and have your children read out loud to you too. Read printed books. Don't just read on a screen. It reprograms your brain when you're always reading on a screen. The memories you make reading together, you will always have. Nobody can take that away from you. You need to give your kids not just a Thomas Jefferson education, but an Abraham Lincoln education. And I love the quote, "Richer than I, you could never be." I had a mother who read to me. I think it's incredible.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Before we wrap up our part 2 of Just Say No to Smut in Schools, we'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor, Sherry Jensen. We're so grateful for her generous support to be able to get the word out to parents and families across the state about why you need to know more about what's happening in the public schools. We would like you to go ahead and subscribe to our channel on We Are the People Network. And we would also like to encourage parents to email us with information they may have about what's going on in their schools. You can send those emails to unbreakabletruthshow@gmail.com. And please follow us on YouTube and on X at Higher Ground UT. That's at Higher Ground UT. And go to our website, higherground.org, if you'd like to see more information that we have researched about what's happening in education today.
A few decades ago, the idea of exposing our children to degrading, demoralizing, destructive, and deviant content would have been, if not unthinkable, at least unspeakable. But now we live in a time where too many people feel not only enabled, but entitled to lure your children to content that is mind-melting and soul-killing. As parents, we have to be our children's first and best protection. Cultivate your own traditions of reading the best books. Give your children a taste of the best books, of music and culture, so that they can learn to prize the best and reject the vulgar and the debased. Whether you have children in the public education system or are homeschooling, the stakes are higher than ever when it comes to the battle over who gets to shape the minds and hearts of your children. And never trust your children to the so-called experts, no matter how competent they may seem. Frederick Douglass once said, "It is easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men."
Helping children and families to find truth so that they can become unbreakable. We are Monica and Natalie on Unbreakable Truth in Education on the We Are the People Network. We'll see you here next time.